Let me tell you something that might sound harsh, but you need to hear it. That woman who can't stop thinking about him, who checks her phone every 5 minutes, hoping he texted, who feels her stomach drop when he goes cold for a day. What's happening in her brain is way more intense than you think. And here's the kicker. She has no idea. If you've ever watched someone become completely consumed by a person who barely gives them the time of day, or maybe you've felt it yourself, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The constant emotional highs and lows, the way everything else fades into background noise, the physical symptoms when they're gone. But here's what you need to understand. This isn't just strong feelings or bad attachment. There's actual neuroscience behind why certain relationship patterns create this level of obsession, why inconsistency works better than stability, why the brain gets locked into this cycle and can't break free. And the wildest part, most women in this state would swear it's the deepest connection they've ever felt. Because when your brain chemistry shifts in this specific way, it doesn't feel like a problem. It feels like the most real thing in the world. Before we go further, let me be clear about something. This isn't a video about manipulation tactics or how to create unhealthy patterns in someone's life. If that's what you're looking for, you're in the wrong place. What we're talking about here is understanding human psychology at a deeper level. The science of attachment, the neuroscience of connection, the behavioral patterns that shape how people bond, often without realizing what's actually driving those feelings. Because here's the truth. When you understand these mechanisms, you're not getting a playbook for control. You're getting clarity. The ability to recognize what's happening in your own relationships, or when you see someone caught in these cycles. Knowledge that helps you make better choices, set healthier boundaries, and understand human behavior beyond surface-level assumptions. So we're approaching this from a place of education, not exploitation. With me, good. Because what we're about to explore goes deeper than most people are willing to look. So why does this happen? Why do some women become completely consumed by men who give them just enough attention to keep them hooked, but never enough to feel secure? You've seen it. Maybe in a friend who used to have her life together, and now she's constantly checking her phone, canceling plans in case he might text. Riding this emotional roller coaster that everyone around her can see is destroying her peace. Or maybe you've experienced it yourself. That state where someone takes up so much mental space that everything else becomes background noise. And here's what makes this so dangerous. Society has romanticized this exact pattern. Every love song, every movie, every story we're told about real love describes obsession, the inability to eat or sleep, the constant thoughts, the highs and lows. We've been taught that if it doesn't hurt, if it doesn't consume you, it's not deep enough. That intensity equals significance. But what if that's completely backwards? What if the thing we've been calling chemistry or spark, or when you know, what if that's actually your brain getting caught in patterns that have nothing to do with compatibility and everything to do with how we're wired to respond to uncertainty? Because there's a mechanism at work here. A predictable, repeatable process that happens in the brain when specific relationship dynamics play out. And until you understand how it works, you'll keep mistaking addiction for attraction, confusion for connection, biochemical chaos for depth. So here's what we're going to explore. This breaks down into 3 layers that build on each other. First, the neurochemical layer. What's actually happening in her brain when these patterns form? We're talking dopamine cycles, oxytocin bonding, reward pathways, the specific brain chemistry that creates craving instead of satisfaction. Second, the behavioral layer, the patterns that create and sustain this response, intermittent reinforcement, push-pull dynamics, the cycles of emotional availability that keep the brain locked in. This is where you'll understand why inconsistency is more addictive than stability. And third, The emotional layer. Why she doesn't realize it's happening. How attachment styles drive these patterns unconsciously. Why it feels like the deepest connection she's ever experienced when it might actually be the most destructive. By the end, you'll understand the complete mechanism and be able to recognize the difference between healthy intensity and problematic dependency. Let's start with what's happening at the brain chemistry level. Let's talk about dopamine first, because this is where most people get it wrong. Dopamine isn't the pleasure chemical, it's the craving chemical. It doesn't create satisfaction. It creates the desire for satisfaction. And that distinction is everything. When a woman interacts with someone who triggers strong attraction, her brain releases dopamine. But here's the critical part. The dopamine spikes highest not when she gets what she wants, but when she's uncertain whether she'll get it. This is basic neuroscience. Variable reward schedules create stronger dopamine responses than predictable rewards. Think about it like a slot machine. You don't get a dopamine hit when you win every time. You get it from not knowing whether this pull will pay off. That uncertainty, that anticipation, that keeps you pulling the lever. And in relationships, when someone's attention is unpredictable, when they're hot one day and cold the next, when they text back immediately sometimes and disappear for days, other times, that creates the same neurochemical response. Now add oxytocin. This bonding chemical releases during intimacy and vulnerable moments, creating attachment. It makes you feel connected, like this person is essential. Combined with dopamine craving cycles, it's powerful. When he's available, her brain floods with both chemicals. When he pulls away, they drop. The brain interprets that drop as withdrawal, actual physical withdrawal. The anxious thoughts, compulsive checking, inability to focus, stomach drop, panic. All of it is neurochemical. This isn't metaphor. Brain imaging studies show that romantic rejection and obsession activate the same neural pathways as cocaine withdrawal. The same ones. The craving isn't different in kind. It's identical in mechanism. The brain doesn't recognize this as a problem. It interprets intensity as proof of significance. Constant thoughts. He must be important. Physical symptoms from absence. He must be necessary. The harder to let go, the more it feels like real connection. But intensity doesn't equal compatibility. A strong neurochemical response doesn't mean you've found your person. It just means your brain's reward system has been activated in a specific way. And once that cycle starts, it becomes self-reinforcing. Every time you get that hit of attention after a period of uncertainty, the pattern gets stronger. The brain learns. This person equals intense feeling. And it starts craving that feeling more than the person themselves. That's the neurochemistry. But neurochemistry alone doesn't create addiction. The real trap is in the behavioral patterns that keep this cycle running. So we've established the brain chemistry. Dopamine craving, oxytocin bonding, withdrawal symptoms when he's unavailable. But here's where it gets deeper. What keeps that cycle running isn't just the neurochemicals. It's the pattern of when those chemicals get released. This is called intermittent reinforcement, and it's one of the most powerful behavioral conditioning mechanisms we know. B. Seth. Skinner discovered this decades ago studying rats. When you reward a behavior every single time, the behavior is learned quickly, but extinguishes quickly when rewards stop. But when you reward behavior unpredictably, sometimes yes, sometimes no, no pattern to when the reward comes, that behavior becomes almost impossible to extinguish. This is why gambling is so addictive. The slot machine doesn't pay out every time. It's random, variable, and that uncertainty creates compulsion. You keep pulling the lever because maybe this time, maybe next time. The unpredictability itself becomes the hook. Now apply this to relationships. When someone is consistently available, consistently attentive, the brain adapts. It knows what to expect. The reward is predictable, so the dopamine response actually decreases over time. You habituate. It becomes comfortable, but not intense. But when someone's attention is inconsistent, when they're incredibly present one day and distant the next, when they flood you with affection and then disappear for days, that creates the variable reward schedule, and the brain doesn't adapt. It stays in high alert, constantly seeking the next hit of attention. This is the push-pull dynamic. Pursuit mode. He's chasing, attentive, vulnerable. Then withdrawal mode. Distant, unavailable. The cycle between these creates the addiction pattern. The brain starts living for the highs because the lows make them more intense. Every return after pulling away floods her with relief and dopamine. The longer he's gone, the bigger the hit. This trains her to crave him more than if he'd been consistently present. The hardest person to get becomes most addictive, not because they're higher value, but because unavailability creates the perfect variable reward schedule. The chase itself becomes the attachment. Difficulty getting attention makes attention feel more valuable. This pattern, hot and cold, available and unavailable, follows a rhythm. Emotional availability cycles. Vulnerable connection, then walls up. Intimacy, then retreat. When this repeats, her emotional state ties completely to his cycle. Anxious when distant, elated when close. Her baseline disappears, always chasing or relieved. Never settled. If he became consistent, intensity would drop. Her brain's conditioned to the pattern, not the person. Remove the chaos, dopamine response drops. She might feel like the spark's gone when really what's gone is the behavioral trap. Now here's where it gets deeper. Her attachment style might be unconsciously driving this. We're halfway through, and this next part explains why awareness is so hard. Because sometimes these patterns aren't just created by his behavior. They're driven by something deeper in her psychology. Attachment theory breaks down into three main styles. Secure attachment. Comfortable with closeness and independence. Able to trust without anxiety. Anxious attachment. Craves closeness. Fears abandonment. Needs constant reassurance. Avoidant attachment. Values independence. Uncomfortable with intimacy. Pulls away when things get too close. Now here's where it gets interesting. When an anxiously attached woman meets an avoidantly attached man, they create the perfect storm. She pursues connection. He withdraws to maintain distance. Her pursuit triggers his avoidance. His avoidance triggers her anxiety. And they both end up locked in a dance. Neither of them consciously chose, but both of them feel compelled to continue. This isn't about anyone being broken or toxic. It's about childhood patterns replaying in adult relationships. If you learned early that love was inconsistent, that people left without warning, that you had to chase to keep people close, that becomes your template. And as an adult, relationships that match that template feel familiar. They feel like home, even when home was chaotic. So when she meets someone whose behavior creates uncertainty, her anxious attachment interprets that as normal. This is what love feels like to her. The anxiety, the need to chase, the fear of losing him, that's not a red flag to her nervous system. That's validation that this is real, because pain has always been part of her love equation. The uncomfortable truth. She might be more attracted because of the pain, not despite it, because that pain confirms her existing beliefs about what relationships are supposed to feel like, and she has no idea this is happening. She just knows he matters in a way others haven't. This is the trauma bond distinction. A trauma bond isn't just bad relationship. It's when intermittent reinforcement combines with anxious attachment to create a bond based on the cycle of hurt and relief rather than consistent safety. The brain bonds to the source of both the pain and the soothing. And that creates attachment that's incredibly hard to break, because the very thing causing the problem is also providing the relief, versus a love bond, which is built on consistent availability, mutual respect, and secure attachment, where intensity comes from depth of understanding, not depth of chaos, where connection is sustaining, not exhausting. So if all this is happening unconsciously, can she even recognize it? That's the problem. The short answer: usually no. She can't recognize it. And here's why. When you're inside an addiction pattern, it doesn't feel like addiction. It feels like significance. Like this person matters more than anyone else ever has. Like the connection is deeper, more real, more intense. And in a way, she's right. The intensity is real. It's just not coming from where she thinks it is. This is the familiarity bias at work. The brain recognizes patterns from childhood and labels them as correct or home, or this is what love looks like. So when she meets someone whose behavior creates the same emotional states she experienced growing up, it doesn't register as a red flag. It registers as recognition. Finally, someone who feels right. But there's another mechanism: idealization. When dopamine spikes and oxytocin bonds, her brain fills gaps with fantasy. She's not seeing who he is. She's seeing the potential of who he could be in those present moments. Every return after absence gives evidence he can be that person. Her brain holds on to that, explaining away his inconsistency. The rationalization machine. He's busy, dealing with things, scared of feelings. She creates narratives making sense of chaos because accepting the pattern as the problem is too painful. This is projection at its finest. She's seeing who she wants him to be, not who he's showing up as. And the more inconsistent he is, the more room there is for her imagination to fill in. The gaps between his presence become spaces where she can construct the perfect version of him. A version that doesn't exist but feels incredibly real to her. Most people in addiction-style relationships would swear it's the deepest love. They'd defend it passionately. Because when brain chemistry is hijacked, attachment triggered, and childhood wounds activated, objective assessment isn't possible. The rationalization gets so elaborate. But we have such deep conversations when we're together. Yes, because intermittent, deep connection after periods of distance creates intensity that feels profound. But I've never felt this way about anyone else. Right. Because stable relationships don't trigger the same neurochemical chaos. But when it's good, it's amazing. That's the variable reward schedule. The highs feel higher because the lows are so low. Every single rationalization is her brain trying to make sense of why she feels this strongly. And the brain's answer is always, because this is special. Because he's special. Because this connection is real. Never. Because the pattern is addictive. So how do you actually tell the difference? How do you know if intensity is healthy or if it's a red flag? Here's what to look for. Let's get specific. These are the behavioral markers of unhealthy patterns. First, emotional volatility directly tied to his availability. If her entire mood, her ability to function, focus, feel okay, depends on whether he's texted back, that's dependency, not connection. Healthy attraction enhances your emotional state. Addiction controls it. Second, constant need for reassurance. If she needs repeated validation that he cares, that he's not losing interest, that everything's okay, and that reassurance only lasts a few hours before the anxiety returns, that's the dopamine cycle at work, not secure attachment. Third, inability to function well when apart. Can she go about her day, enjoy her life, maintain her other relationships when he's not around? Or does everything feel gray and meaningless until he's back? Interdependence means you can stand alone but choose to be together. Dependency means you can't stand without them. Fourth, relationship dominates thought life. Occasional thoughts about someone you're attracted to. Normal. Obsessive thinking where you're analyzing every text, replaying every conversation, planning what to say next, imagining future scenarios constantly. That's the brain locked in a craving loop. Fifth, sacrificing boundaries and values. If she's consistently doing things that go against her own values, ignoring her own needs, accepting treatment she knows isn't okay, just to maintain the connection, that's addiction overriding judgment. Sixth, the can't live without you feeling. Not I love being with you, or you make my life better, but genuine panic at the thought of losing them. The sense that life wouldn't be worth living without this person. That's not love. That's terror of withdrawal. Now contrast healthy intensity, consistent emotional baseline even when apart. She misses him, looks forward to seeing him, but she's okay. Still capable. Still herself. The relationship adds without consuming. Mutual respect for boundaries. Both can say no. Need space. Have separate interests. That doesn't threaten connection, it strengthens it. Sustainable over time. Doesn't require crisis for intensity. Depth from actually knowing each other, not uncertainty's drama. Enhances life. Doesn't consume it. Makes both people better versions of themselves. More grounded, more connected to their values. Based on actual compatibility, shared values, complementary goals, genuine understanding, not manufactured crisis or biochemical chaos. Here are the questions to ask. Does this relationship make me more myself or less? If you're losing parts of who you are to maintain the connection, that's a problem. Am I choosing this person or needing them? Choice comes from wanting to share your life with someone. Need comes from feeling like you can't survive without them. Could I walk away if our values misaligned? If the answer is no, I'm too attached. That's not commitment. That's addiction. Healthy love includes the ability to choose yourself if the relationship becomes unhealthy. Now, here's the truth. Nobody wants to hear about all of this. Even with full awareness, these patterns don't automatically disappear. Understanding dopamine cycles, intermittent reinforcement, attachment wounds. You're still susceptible. Knowledge doesn't make you immune. It gives you a choice you didn't have before. The uncomfortable reality. Society romanticizes these exact patterns. Every love song, movie, story celebrates obsession. Sleepless nights. Constant thoughts. Emotional chaos. We call it passion. But we're celebrating addiction. Here's the ethical dilemma. Knowing these mechanisms doesn't give you the right to engineer them. This isn't a playbook for creating addiction. It's a framework for recognizing when it's happening, in yourself, in others. The goal isn't immunity to intensity. It's discernment about which intensity is healthy. You can recognize when patterns drive you toward chaos instead of stability. When familiar overrides compatible. When dopamine masquerades as connection. This isn't about judgment. It's about expanding choice. Most people in addiction-style relationships don't know there's another option. They think this is what love feels like. If you're in a relationship with this intensity, ask, am I here because I'm choosing growth? Or because the pattern is choosing me? Am I staying because this makes me better? Or because leaving feels impossible? Understanding doesn't eliminate patterns, but it creates space to recognize what's happening. Space to question whether intensity equals depth. Space to choose differently if it doesn't serve you. That space, that's what separates awareness from ignorance, conscious evolution from unconscious repetition. Have you ever experienced this pattern, either being the person caught in it, or watching someone you care about go through it? What made you realize what was actually happening? Drop your experience in the comments. I read every single one, and I'm genuinely curious how this shows up in real life. Because here's what matters. Every story adds another layer of understanding to this phenomenon. The more we talk about these patterns openly, the less power they have over us. This channel isn't about manipulation tactics or relationship games. It's about understanding human psychology deeply enough to make conscious choices. We're building a community that values awareness over strategy, understanding over exploitation, growth over control. And if that resonates with you, if you want more content that explores the real psychology of connection without the pickup artist nonsense, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and be part of this conversation. Understanding addiction patterns doesn't make you immune to them, but it does give you a choice, and that choice, between unconscious repetition and conscious evolution, between letting patterns run you and recognizing them for what they are, that's what separates wisdom from knowledge. Choose wisely.